Myths tell us how society contends with the human condition, how people perceive good and evil, success and suffering, origins and destiny. Because myths are a snapshot of the cultures, perspectives, and people that created them, they adopt their unique aesthetics, ideology, and identity. The tropical Mayans and Aztecs filled their pantheons with sun gods like Kinich and Quetzalcoatl. The Greeks worshipped warrior gods that embodied the physical and intellectual ideals of ancient Greece. The Slavs dreaded a bestiary of terrors like the Kikimora and Baba Yaga. While some myths are inspired by real people and events, most are metaphysical representations of people's perception. They tell us what people thought about and aspired for, what entertained them, and what horrified them. Some myths were simply cautionary tales against bad behavior, excesses, and deviations, while others were historical tales embellished and immortalized as ideals to strive for. Many myths grew out of religions that needed rules to govern shared morality and gods to enforce the rules. While its prominence in governing the world has diminished, mythology continues to feature prominently in art and entertainment. Ancient mythology inspired exceptional writers and poets to create their own mythology, adopting its features and identity into coherent, timeless stories. Tolkien created Middle-earth as a mythology of medieval Britain that was successfully adapted into Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. Andrzej Sapkowski combined various medieval European mythologies to create the world of The Witcher, famously known for its excellent video game adaptations. Unlike historical adaptations that are constrained by historical facts, mythological adaptations allow more creative liberty in their interpretations. However, adaptations of mythology only maintain their significance, authenticity, and integrity when they are faithful to the people and time that created the mythos. As our culture and socio-political landscape has changed, so have the adaptations of European mythology in entertainment in a trend that predictably only goes one way. In a bid to serve the dominant perspective of Hollywood today, creatives have abandoned the aesthetics and messages of the eras and people that created the mythology that they adapt. Modern writers insert their own vapid ideology into fables that have stood the test of time and create a product that is uninspired, inauthentic, and incoherent. European mythology has by far been the biggest victim of this modern trend. Well, let's dive into the desecration of European mythology in cinema and explore how to make better adaptations in the future. Before I dive into the tragic desecration of European mythology, let's do a little thought exercise on mythology from outside Europe. Imagine a world where Anansi was cast as a ginger trickster, spinning stories to the adoring Africans of the Gold Coast. Why not? Of course a white ginger would fit perfectly in pre-colonial Africa, no questions. Never mind the fact that pre-colonial Africans were unlikely to and certainly did not conceive a prominent deity of their mythology as a Caucasian. Oh, but Anansi was just a myth, so it doesn't matter how he's represented by adaptations, right? While at it, let's reimagine Quetzalcoatl as a blonde, thunder-wielding sea goddess that slays anyone who engages in ritual sacrifices. Doesn't matter that the Aztecs weren't known for their sailing, and a virtuous sea god that has no tolerance for human sacrifice would be incredibly ironic given the religious customs of the Aztecs. Oh, but it doesn't matter if you retcon how Aztecs interpreted their gods, it's all just myths with no relationship to reality, right? Remember Vishnu, one of many Hindu deities? Let's reimagine him as Victor III, a Teutonic crusader that spreads the Christian gospel in an early Puranic India. Never mind the fact that Hinduism was and is a polytheistic belief system, and a Bible-thumping Germanic Vishnu in a medieval India would not only be absurd but antithetical to Hinduism then and now. Oh, but religion is all made up, so we can just imagine it however we want in media, right? To anyone that sees nothing wrong with any of these scenarios, congratulations, the second half of this video is going to be smooth sailing for you. In the real world, these reimaginations will be met with a torrent of outrage. You'll be reminded that Anansi was an African creation and must be cast as black in a pre-colonial Africa, that Quetzalcoatl was an Aztec god and should be reflected in true Mesoamerican culture, and that medieval Hindu mythology should not be replaced with European Christianity. Ironically, these arguments will be thrown at you by the same people that are incapable of understanding why reimagining ancient European mythology is egregious. If you dare stay your course, you'll be accused of whitewashing, race swapping, and erasing other cultures. You'll be charged with gross historical and cultural ignorance with a vehemence that is preserved for every ancient mythology. Well, every mythology except European mythology. Europe has a well-documented history and mythology that is as rich as it's ubiquitous. Many modern stories, movies, and shows are inspired in some way by European mythology. Popular franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and God of War are drawn from pantheons of Greek, Roman, and Nordic gods to bring us iconic characters like Zeus and Thor. Tolkien and Sapkowski created bestiaries entirely inspired by the horror stories of the Celts, Slavs, and Scandinavians. Medieval European fables created elves, dwarves, and many races that make up popular fantasy today. The 20th century and early 2000s brought many faithful adaptations of the mythology, cultures, and races of past Europe. There is no better example of excellent adaptations than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Peter Jackson's filmcraft and commitment to the spirit of Tolkien propelled this trilogy to financial and critical success. To no one's surprise, the recent Rings of Power series failed on all counts and will only be remembered as the most expensive flop on TV. More on that later. European mythology has become a recent victim of a politically correct ideology that wears the veneer of social justice to inject modern identity politics into every aspect of life. With ever-increasing calls for representation, ideologically possessed creatives have sought to redress the past by eliminating everything that is uniquely European. Many new adaptations have been cast with actors and aesthetics that are not reflective of ancient Europe and in a way that does not make sense in their settings. Interpersonal dynamics have been revised to reflect either the metropolitan integration of modern societies or the grievous identity politics sweeping through the West today. Whether it's true belief in representation at all costs or the desire to meet quotas for awards, Hollywood has set out to reimagine both ancient European mythology and the work that it inspired. Take the MCU for example, where a Norse Valkyrie is this, and Heimdall from Norse mythology is Idris Elba. Make no mistake, Idris Elba is a fantastic actor but is miscast as Heimdall, in the same way that Ryan Reynolds would make a horrible casting for Anansi, despite his obvious talent. Netflix's Witcher race-swapped characters and sapped the Slavic culture out of this medieval fantasy of Eastern Europe. The Rings of Power gives us black dwarves, which makes very little sense when you think about where Tolkien's dwarves live. Elves that Tolkien specified as ethereal and fair-skinned are somehow this. Time and again, fans have called out these cheap race, culture, and aesthetic swaps, and every time, these fans have been called racist, bigoted, toxic, and obsolete. Ironically, this is by the same people that are quick to call out whitewashing when characters are too fair-skinned or depictions are too Eurocentric for their liking, even when the source material itself is actually European. Indeed, it's hard to miss that in today's Hollywood, these reimaginations often go only one way. You'd be hard-pressed to find any big-budget modern adaptations of African, Mesoamerican, and Asian mythology that deliberately deconstruct the heritage, culture, and race of their heroes. Ultimately, ancient European mythology is rapidly losing its unique identity, blending ever more into the modern metropolitan porridge written for a small but lionized modern audience. There are reasonable ways to introduce diverse identities in mythological cinema. The most obvious way is to adapt mythology from other parts of the world, which is rich and plentiful. If non-native characters are included, it should be done sparingly and in a way that is consistent with how the people that created the mythology would perceive them, foreign and exotic to their culture. This is something that the Witcher Wild Hunt game does well with the Ophir merchants, who are ethnically foreign merchants with their own unique culture, skills, and mythology. Another way is through adaptations that are clearly detached from any mythological continuity, like satire, parodies, and stage plays. Obviously, these risk deconstructing and insulting the source material, but can be done masterfully by good, reverent writers. Don't get me wrong, identity and aesthetics are irrelevant in most facets of life, and modern integration is often not only necessary but ideal. As a normal human being, you don't want to pass on the best accountant, surgeon, or friend simply because of their racial and cultural heritage. But mythology isn't about you. It's about the perspectives of specific people with specific values from a specific culture at a specific point in time. In human form, Thor was conceived as a large Caucasian man in Nordic mythology in the same way that Anansi was a black trickster in West African mythology. There's often little reason to preserve identity or aesthetics in entertainment, but history and mythology are the strongest cases. Of course, modern creatives can do whatever they want, and they do so often in service of their own worldviews, but this is as unproductive as it is corrosive. Sure, you can reimagine the Wild Hunt as misunderstood black social justice warriors, or make the death of Osiris about the American War on Terror. But don't be surprised by backlash from fans of the original mythology or the inevitable theatrical failure and obscurity of your work. And all for what? Why not just create new mythos instead of desecrating ideas that are much older and much grander than any one person living today? Creations as ancient and elaborate as mythology can and should be separated from the politics of their contemporary writers and creators. Mythology is hardly the only victim of modern reimaginations, as historical stories and many 20th century works have suffered the same fate. Stay tuned for future videos on these topics. With every reimagination, mythology loses its heart. When fables are recast to reflect the phenotype of society today, they lose the unique heritage of their creators. When fables are rewritten to appeal to modern narratives, they lose the perspectives of the past. What we are left with is an indistinct sludge that erases the rich, distinct perspectives and identities of people that lived before us. That's all for this video. Do you like mythology? What is your favorite mythology and has it been reimagined? Thanks to all the Relentless Fellowship for all your comments and feedback. I appreciate every single fine soul that tunes into my videos and engages in the comments. You stay tuned and stay cool.